Professional property management isn't for everyone, and we understand that. Somebody asks, who's your competition? The natural response they would be looking for is, oh, XYZ company or ABC company. Our number one competition actually is self-management. And that's pretty true across the country because in the United States, we actually as a nation run below other first world countries as far as the employment of professional property management services. Maybe it's our pull yourself up by your bootstraps history, maybe it's a DIY nation perspective. But for us, self-management is our number one competition, and some of the reasons it presents some difficulties is because people don't value their time properly. They think because they can take that phone call on that Saturday evening and run out there and it doesn't cost them anything, that they're saving money. But what they're not looking at is the opportunity cost, truly valuing what their time is worth based on their profession, how else they could be employing themselves or doing something rather than spending those 2, 3, 4 hours on a Saturday night running out to that apartment or that house to fix that issue. So one of the issues with self-management is people live in a false economy. They don't truly value their own time. Another issue with self-management is more and more the laws around landlord-tenant regulations are becoming increasingly intricate and complex and more difficult to navigate. The fines and penalties to doing it wrong are increasing, and a well-intentioned, self-managed landlord can find themselves in a very difficult position that can be very costly, that had they had professional guidance, professional property management, they could have avoided altogether. So the savings they thought they were realizing by self-management can be blown away in one fell swoop with one wrong decision around landlord-tenant law. And those laws are constantly changing. You might have known them 5 years ago, you might have known them 2 years ago, hell, you might have known them last year. This year they're different. And as it relates to a decision you're making right now, they could be impacting your decision in a way that you don't understand because you didn't pay attention over the last 6 months or 12 months when the laws changed, and it impacts how you're doing things today. And that is felt at every opportunity as a landlord. Vetting tenants, or as we call them, residents, placing residents is probably the most highly leveraged activity of anything any landlord or property manager can do, because good residents can make a P&L and bad residents can break a P&L. That's the landlord side. Good residents will get along with other residents and they'll create a happy, harmonious environment. Bad residents can poison the well and make life miserable for the other residents who are otherwise great people just going about their lives, paying their rent on time. So the landlord or the property manager has a responsibility to find and place the best quality residents for the sake of not only their own balance sheet, but the sake of, just as equally important, the residents that are already in place. Because turnover is the most expensive thing for most property owners as a recurring event. So minimizing turnover is critically important. And the best way to minimize turnover is to find and place the best quality residents the first time, every time. To do it takes time, energy, process, procedure. You have to have access to the information. You have to dedicate time. You have to do it in an objective fashion that meets all fair housing laws, so you're not stepping on protected class issues or otherwise running afoul of the government at both the local, state, and federal level. And you gotta do that every single time. There is no short circuit way to find great residents. A lot of times when self-managing landlords come to us, they have reached a breaking point. There's usually a catalyst. They were managing yesterday and they don't want to do it anymore. The first question we ask is why? What's going on? You can do it, you've been doing it. More often than not, what we find, that catalyst, assuming it isn't growth or some other life event, I'm moving out of state, or I've just taken on this job where I'm going to be an executive and I don't have the time for it anymore, or I've grown the portfolio. The other reasons are resident issues, property issues. And those resident issues, a lot of times what comes to light is the residents are way under market because the self-managing landlord didn't want to raise rents, didn't want to rock the cart, right? Didn't want to spill any extra work onto their plate by creating that turnover, so they kept the rents artificially low to not rock the boat. A potential client comes to us, a self-managing landlord shows up on our doorstep and says, I've had enough, I want to engage a professional property manager, heard great things about you, want to engage you guys. The first thing we're going to start doing is going into a data gathering mode. Who are these residents? How long they've been placed? What are their tenant ledgers? Do they pay on time? Have they been problem residents and creating a lot of issues for other residents, calling in a lot of maintenance requests that turn out to be unnecessary, frivolous, and just creating problems? Or are they good residents that are simply under market in terms of what they're paying? If it is a bad resident, regardless of what they're paying, and there isn't any corrective action that hasn't already been taken to try to get them on the path to prosperity, then we're going to talk to that client about how they want to move forward with that resident. If it's a good resident, though, that they would rather keep in place, but they're under market, then we create a plan to find a way to keep them in place, but begin moving them to what we would consider market rent. And there might be some give and take. Maybe they've been a great resident that's been in that unit for 15 years. And so that's oftentimes why they're under market, right? Because they've been there so long and their regular rental increases haven't taken place. But the flip side of that is they've been in that place for 15 years. Maybe they need new carpets. Maybe they could use a fresh coat of paint on one of the rooms. Maybe they need some new flooring somewhere else, or maybe the cabinets are falling off the walls, but they didn't complain because the rent was so low. So there's a give and a take. You might have to do a little bit of capital improvement, a little bit of value add as a give and a take if you think it's worth it, and then raise their rent accordingly. And now you've incentivized that resident to stay where they are, not creating a turnover, increasing your rent as an ongoing concern, but they're also happy because they feel better about the place that they're living. Evictions. Evictions can happen for a number of reasons. Everybody wants to avoid it. They really do. They're costly. You're going to have a dead loss with lost rent. You're going to have a dead loss as far as time off the market. You're going to have turnover costs. Invariably, the unit or the house is not turned over in pristine condition. You're going to have lease-up fees. There's all of these costs that are generated from a turnover, let alone an eviction. And the one we haven't talked about is attorney's fees and court costs and all those things. But if it comes to that, you have to make sure you're following the letter of the law down to the signature on the demand letters. Something as simple as that can get the case thrown out after waiting 45 days or whatever it was to get your day in court. You might get thrown out of court just for the simple fact that you didn't follow the law as far as even how the signature was supposed to appear on the demand letter, as it were. And so what a professional property manager can do is help you navigate all of those intricacies, that literal minefield that exists between you and a successful eviction. Again, nobody wants it, but when it comes down to it and it has to happen, you gotta get across the finish line as efficiently as possible. So lead is a really big deal. And there's been lead laws on the books for many, many years. But through a series of additional laws that have been enacted, as well as enforcement of existing laws, lead has become a very big deal in the state of Rhode Island, I would argue nationally. There are now deadlines in place. For self-managing landlords, it can be a very daunting task to navigate the laws, be in compliance, know the intricacies of how compliance works, understand that in the state of Rhode Island that a lead safe certificate has an expiration date, and there are ways to renew it depending on the condition, and you need to understand what those are. And if you navigate it correctly, great, then it's business as usual. But if you navigate it incorrectly, there are now real ramifications that can affect not only your pocketbook, but actually how your property moves forward as an ongoing concern. And if you want to do that successfully, you have to be extremely well versed in the law. You have to understand the timelines involved. You have to have access to the resources to do the work, know how lead testing is done, and understand how all of this works within a pretty tight timeline. My final thoughts on self-management are this. I pay Stonelink to manage my own properties because I don't have time to do it right. That's it.